Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey. In his book, A Higher Call, author Adam Marcos tells a remarkable story. It was 5 days before Christmas, 1943. World War II was raging in Europe. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men was in short supply. Charles Brown, a 21-year-old West Virginia farm boy, was on his first combat mission over Germany as the pilot of a B-17. His aircraft had been attacked by 15 German planes and left for dead, though still in the air. Brown himself had been knocked out in the assault, regaining consciousness just in time to pull the plane out of a near-fatal nosedive. Half the tail was now missing, and there were bullet holes everywhere, so he was struggling to stay airborne. He was flying dangerously low over Germany, heading back to his base in England with just 2 of the 4 engines still working. Other British bombers that had survived the successful bombing raid on a German munitions factory in Bremen had left Brown's plane far behind on their journey home. Now half its crew was wounded, and the tail gunner, his blood frozen in icicles over the machine guns, dead. Suddenly, Brown glanced out of his cockpit, stunned. He and his co-pilot blinked hard, and they looked again, hoping it was just a mirage. They were looking at a grey German Messerschmitt 109 fighter, hovering just 3 feet off their wingtip. The fighter had closed in on the mutilated American bomber for the kill. But when Brown and his co-pilot looked at the enemy fighter pilot again, something odd happened. The German didn't pull the trigger. He stared back at the bomber in amazement and respect. Instead of pressing the attack, he nodded at Brown and saluted. The German pilot just couldn't bring himself to shoot in this circumstance. He could see that the skin of the B-17 had been peeled away by shells and its guns knocked out. He could even detect men huddled inside the plane, tending their wounds and the wounds of other crewmen in the frigid winter air. It would be inhumane to attack. Murder, like shooting at a parachute, he thought. The Messerschmitt pilot was Major Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe ace from Bavaria, with 22 aerial victories to his name, and eligible for the coveted Knight's Cross Award with just 1 more downed enemy bomber. But Stigler was a man of faith, who had once studied to be a priest. In 1940, he had lost his only brother, another fighter pilot. How could he shoot down a seriously damaged plane that was doomed to crash anyway and carrying wounded airmen? No, Stigler couldn't shoot. Instead, he changed his mission, risking his life, since he knew full well that if discovered, he would be executed by the Nazis for sparing the enemy. He nodded again to the American pilot, saluted, and began flying in formation with him, so anti-aircraft gunners on the ground wouldn't shoot down the slow-moving wounded bomber. Stigler escorted Charlie Brown's B-17 bomber until it was out over the North Sea, and then he took one last look at the American pilot, saluted him again, and peeled his fighter away to return to base, thinking it unlikely that the big B-17 could make it back to England anyway. Good luck, he said to himself. You're in God's hands now. As Brown watched the German fighter disappear, he was thinking only of survival. Carefully, he nursed his battered plane with its wounded cargo back to England and managed to land safely at an alternate airfield, almost out of fuel. After his bomber rolled to a stop, Brown leaned back in his seat and just sat there, stunned in silence. Brown flew more missions before the war ended. And then life moved on. He married, had 2 daughters, took a government job, and eventually retired to Florida. Late in life, Brown determined to discover the identity of the German pilot who had saved his life. He placed a carefully worded advertisement in a German newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots, asking if any had seen his slow-moving, disabled B-17 on December 20, 1943. As a result, on January 18, 1990, Brown received a letter which read, "Dear Charles, all these years I wondered what happened to that B-17. Did she make it home? Did her crew survive their wounds? To hear of your survival has filled me with indescribable joy. It was Stigler. He'd left Germany after the war, moved to Vancouver in Canada, become a prosperous businessman, and was now retired." Shortly after this discovery, the 2 pilots met in the lobby of a Florida hotel. They fell into each other's arms, weeping and laughing, as they reviewed their amazing experience in 1943. Charlie Brown was the only good thing that came out of the World War II for Franz Stigler. They had met as enemies, but ended up as close friends, flying cross-country to visit each other's homes, going fishing together, and taking road trips together to share their story. The 2 pilots died within months of each other in 2008. Stigler was 92, Brown was 87. Well, this story of 2 enemies who became firm friends is a reminder of the beauty of reconciliation. In the Bible, Jesus himself underlined the importance of reconciliation. If you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, he said, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. In other words, go and be reconciled to the offender, and then go to church and worship with a clear conscience. Be reconciled, then worship, in that order. The Apostle Paul also made 2 important references to reconciliation. When we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, he wrote. God saw us as mortal failures and sent his Son Jesus to die as our substitute. When we trust him instead of our own so-called good works to get us right with God, the Almighty grants us forgiveness and peace. As Charles Wesley's carol, "Hark the Herald Angels," puts it, God and sinners reconciled. What a concept! God offers us reconciliation as a gift for the taking. And the apostle goes on to say that God, who has reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ, has given us the ministry of reconciliation. We are ambassadors for Christ, he declared. So, if God has reconciled us to himself, he calls us to be his ambassadors to help others find that same reconciliation. Now there's a challenge. This story of the reconciled enemy pilots gives us a serious challenge. And thank you for tuning in once again to Village Church Connections.